we have individuals among the ministry trying to reach out to those who are in these rebel meetings and, convince them that these people are bad and you have to go. If you want to be saved, you got to get out of there. And I've, personally attended one of them, and it's a wonderful experience. It was some of the most uncomplicated fellowship I've had in a long time, because many people would do reach the presumption that, oh, they're just going to be talking about us in there, So no, it wasn't like that at all. And it won't be when you really stop and think about it, because you're trying to get away from that. You're trying to leave that behind, and you're trying to stop thinking like that and start drawing closer to God and focusing again on Jesus and leaving the formality.
I don't think you can say focusing again on Jesus even, because...
Yeah, not really.
I think the shift goes from focusing on the workers, the logistics, and focusing on Christ. That is the shift.
We profess to believe that we don't build churches, right? So to him, that was a church. That wasn't right. Why are we doing this?
That building that was built on the convention grounds was built 100% solely for convention.
Certainly. There was no other point. When it came around to Joe, there was a definite tone shift in terms of this is going to happen.
Yeah, okay.
And with or without you. And that was that Joe decided to have convention at a Methodist church camp.
So in other words, Joe said, move, or we're not having convention.
Precisely. Oh, is this for that Methodist convention? And then he takes it on. So there's quite a demand for this, I guess. We just had another request for that. We're actually doing that for another group. And so that makes it easy. You kind of laid out the same groundwork. It vary a little bit, but we'll give you I'll just quote you what we quoted them. And it was $30,000. A conversation with Barkley.
Okay.
And he stepped in and said, this is egregious and shouldn't be happening. And actually responded pretty admirably at that time. Well, I listened to a worker sit in Manhattan and brag to us all about how he barred a young man from professing because he was pushing his mother's and sister's buttons too much. The horrifying thing to me in that is that I sat there and nodded and listened to it like, yeah, it's being taken care of. Anyone who's still believing that, you're deceiving yourself, because as we've just been discussing, it's still going on.
It's the fruit. What has happened, whether it's the CSA, SA, financial fraud,
thrusting people away from God because
the control.
Yep.
I mean, it's sex, money, and power. Which is crazy to say about this, right? Like, think about it.
It's not anymore. I mean, it makes perfect sense. They're all there. But It's like, none of the friends who had given of their substance would have been okay with people being left out in the cold on financial responsibilities that they thought they were contributing to. I mean, that's putting it as bluntly as possible, because they would give all that they could. I know that there were many who have probably given as much as that widow and her two mites. And
so you're referring to giving to the ministry, giving to the workers?
Correct. I think that's kind of always been the standard. And I mean, some of your other interviewees kind of spoke to that better than I ever could, because, again, it's rather shadowy. All I know was that in terms of initial promises, there was going to be help. There was a very godly man who initially approached my parents, and it was he understood they didn't have means, that they were going to need help with those burdens.
Okay, so this was before they before they purchased the convention grounds?
Correct.
Okay.
Because they actually purchased it at the request of the workers for the purpose of convention.
Okay. Do you know about what year that was?
80.
1980.
I think it was 1980.
So the workers asked them
Might have been, yeah, 1980.
to buy a place that a convention grounds could be built on.
Correct.
Okay.
Yeah, they were approached by Leslie Olson, who's gone now, I believe. Yeah, no, he's been gone some 9 years, something like that. But he was the overseer at the time, and he was a very upright man by all that I can remember of him. Maybe someone has a experience that doesn't match that. It's hard to know anymore, but it just in terms of that arrangement, that was very clear to him that this is right and this is how we do it.
So they asked him to buy grounds. They said, we'll help you financially.
Correct.
To support it.
Correct.
Which makes sense.
Yeah. Well, because it's, people don't always think of this, but I think most people who run businesses and own homes and pay taxes do that. Do understand that. That when you...
Life isn't cheap.
Life is not cheap.
And then
the bigger you build the church, the more those taxes come.
Yeah.
And the insurance climbs and all of it. And so it's...
And speaking from I was an insurance agent for a while. Liability of having hundreds of people come to a place.
Absolutely. That was one of the things that we had that cost so dearly was that if you don't do that,
you have to have the insurance in case regardless of how much you trust the friends and workers, there's an understanding that they're not going to sue you.
Right.
But at the same time,
you're open to the public.
You have to have that liability.
You're open to the public at that point. Someone who has no idea of any of it, who has never been, because that's, if we're living righteously and hoping for fellowship with all souls, then we're inviting anyone who wants to come. So that means that someone who has never met a friend or a worker or only knows one friend from school shows up for the weekend there and, steps on a rusty nail or what have you. Well, if it's a kid and their parents weren't even happy they were there in the first place, there's a lot of liability. There's a huge onion that you could peel back there. But the end of the story is that if you don't want to lose all that you've worked for in this old world, you kind of have to have that. And
okay, sorry.
Go ahead.
We'll hop out of that bunny trail.
Yeah.
So your parents bought the convention grounds, the property, under the assumption, based on what the worker told them, the overseer told them that there would be financial help.
Correct.
To get it up and going.
And there was, as long as he was around.
Okay.
There was, as long as he was there. He was a man of his word. But yeah, it's, and that's something that I've seen a lot too, is there's shifts in things very quickly, indicative of just people's opinions. And you can't fault people for being right or wrong and pass judgment on that, but you also can't then claim that, well, I'm doing this because I'm spirit-led. Well, then was the last guy spirit-led, or why did he do the opposite? So there's a dishonesty component to that. If we're going to claim that administrative stuff is somehow we're greater eligible one way or the other. There's a danger in that, and there can be there's a pretentiousness in that. Pretentiousness is something that I've always been pretty sensitive about too, and disgusted by too, and I've had to kind of unpack that a little bit in the more recent years and months, well, particularly the more recent months, because it's like, why is this such a negative thing? But when you think about it, who's the great pretender? It's like the king of pretentiousness is Satan himself. And so, yeah, it's his it's his influence. So anytime we all live naked before God. He sees all and knows all. So it's like, do we really not believe that? And I would take that back to the whole fun thing. If we're not protecting some nest egg of some sort that we like to have our security in, well then, why aren't we openly discussing actual figures and understanding, is there a need here or not? And actually making sure that what people have done to help is necessary and is being used appropriately.
Okay,
because that's where the right and left hand, knowing what you're doing, that's where that line ends. You don't need to know how much anybody put into that pot, but you do need to know how much is in there and what it's being used for. And that's what any reputable fellowship that's not in it for the money or protecting millions is willing to do.
So let's put that thought aside for a second, and we'll come back to that, because I think that will, when we get to the end of kind of your story here, I think it'll be interesting to come back to that. So after that overseer left or died, or left, I guess,
He
right?
was,
He left the
moved to
state?
Kansas.
Okay. Then what happened?
Well, at that point, it was basically, from then on, I used to think it was just the last few years. And I've written to that in the account that I put together, which I'm going to try to share more freely now, I think. It's only been in the last few years, or I'm sorry, in the last, I can't remember the exact date, but it's only been fairly recently that I learned. Okay, I can remember. It was last summer. When we went and we saw Mom and Dad, and I coaxed him into a conversation that this stuff is not comfortable for him to talk about even now. But he, at that point, that's when I learned that it wasn't the last 7 years that he was without support. It was since '85 when Leslie left.
So from 1985, that means the workers didn't help with what?
As far as I can verify, taxes, insurance, and maybe there were some utilities that were paid. I don't know.
Okay.
But and to be fair, the further out of touch with the working world you get, it's easy for people to just forget those things even happen or exist.
Well, and for those who don't know, or maybe just haven't thought about it, we're talking, because of the size of a convention grounds and the amount of buildings, the insurance because of the liability that we talked about, and just the insurance on the amount of buildings, we're talking, this isn't like your normal household.
No.
This is expenses to a level that hurts really bad.
Well, on that, can I speak to that?
You can.
I'm going to just throw a number on it, because on that, I feel like that's something that people can then finally connect to, because it's all easy to dismiss until you look the bear square in the eye. But that's the place I grew up on, and what it has developed into today. I would approximate those base level expenses that are easy to forget about, as I said, somewhere in the region of 20-some thousand, which is, that's half of most people in that area. That's half of their income already. If they're doing pretty well, that's a low income area.
Yeah, and it's an expensive place to live. Taxes are really high in the Black Hills.
Yeah, there's a lot of tourism there, and so they sales tax 6% still, right, on everything.
6.5.
6.5 now. Oh, lovely. Yeah, so 6.5% on everything. You don't pay income tax at the end of the year like we do here, but it's like you don't. But you pay it a lot throughout the year on everything you buy. But I mean, I'm preaching to the choir. There's states that charge way more than that too. So
yeah, it's a decent state to live in for sure. But property taxes are very high, especially in the hills. That's one of the killers.
Anywhere near those hills, and we could see we're out in the foothills of the Black Hills, so you could see the faces from the top of the driveway. Yeah, you can take binoculars, and when they turn the lights on at night, did you ever do that?
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, you can see it with the naked eye too.
Right. Just not
but
real
yeah.
defined.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a glowing spot out there.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, there's a certain sought after nature to that. And then a lot of these places are, being recategorized or however reassessed, I guess is the word, as commercial properties because
Because it is.
Because it is.
Okay, so in the
And
80s...
it's not got a 501c3 to protect it from that.
it.
So it's reevaluated as a commercial.
So in the 80s, it's safe to say that it was probably north of 50% of your folks' income just to maintain the basic expenses, just because of the amount that it costs.
Yeah, that would have been safe to say. I mean, proportionally, I don't think it's adjusted, but so have wages to a certain degree, I hope. I mean, obviously, it does seem like the gap keeps going.
Yeah.
Even here, it's like the gross is on a vertical climb, which seems awesome, and then you realize, oh, I kept less than ever. So it's kind of a crazy world, but yeah, proportionally, I think it's pretty safe to presume that what they could earn and take home in that day and in that time was relative to where your family would still be at. In terms of this one here that just shut down, it was
in Montana?
Quite a lot higher than that because, in fact, the property taxes alone were higher than that.
Wow.
Because of land value here.
Where you live, yeah.
And so, without help, it's a instant foreclosure unless you're independently wealthy beyond most people's imaginings. And I think more to the point that I'm trying to make here is that we share things, we share burdens, we share work. I mean, that's why there was work days. That's why we did it. And to be clear, that's how I also know the spirit of giving, the spirit of helping. After that letter my brother wrote came out, the upset that caused in people, you can see that they thought they were helping. They thought there was not a deficit there. They thought that.
So you're referring to people who would have
There's a chipmunk.
donated to the workers.
Is that a chipmunk or a squirrel?
Yeah, it's a chipmunk. If he gets close, I'll
with the rock?
get it
Oh no! Oh, that's right. Sorry, I forget. I forget. You're probably more civilized than I was.
No, Okay, we'll jump. Okay,
I'm kidding. I wouldn't hit her with a rock.
So you're referring to friends and workers, maybe older people, whoever would donate $20, $100, either directly toward the workers or towards the convention grounds.
So there were moments, and I couldn't obviously swear to how many. I remember one time that really stood out to me, and I've written about it in the written account that I put out there and put together and put out there. But it is that I remember $100 bill, which at that time was probably equivalent to $500 or $600, maybe $700 now.
Yeah.
And
we won,
and it showed up in an unaddressed envelope. It was addressed to us and postmarked. I don't remember where from, but it was just in an envelope and super sketchy. But it got there, and I just that left a real impression because that was, I think, to the best of my recollection, age-wise and whatnot, I think it was around 93-ish or something like that, maybe early 90s somewhere.
Yeah, $100 was worth a lot more back then. I remember we had to find snowmen in like local businesses, and then you go on a drawing. It was like Christmas time or something.
Oh, okay.
And we won it. So you go and you find a number, whatever. Anyways, we got $100. So I think mom and us 4 kids split it, so we all got $20, and we got to go to Pomida and buy a toy. And that was a lot of money. Yeah. You could get a lot for $20 back then. So
it's like add 2 zeros now, right?
Yeah.
Or a zero, sorry, 1 0. Yeah, $200 would be about the same.
So when people donate what they think is going to maybe convention or just if they donate to the workers, what happens to that if it's not being?
Well, and that's just it. I'm sure that's the tragedy of it is you can't tar everyone with that brush, because I've known of people, I've been around people that came through hard times, and I'll just tell you one story. Old Ben Tuen, it's an old brother worker. Do you remember him?
Yeah.
And,
He was pretty cool.
Oh, he was hilarious, and just a soft-spoken, gentle old soul that wouldn't hurt a fly. And I got to be careful when I keep jinxing things and saying this was my knowledge of him. Okay, let me caveat that. I hope no one else had a different experience.
Yeah.
But it would be really hard to imagine, but not impossible, I suppose. So should we shut down?
Yeah.
People go by. Okay.
Got some people hiking.
Yeah, I think that was the last car in the parking lot. What did I say about this place being unpopulated? I'm kidding. But this does link to the ridge run, which goes all the way down the ridge. So if you really want to go for a hike.
Yeah, I was just joking when I said
that. And actually, when you said climb this mountain, that's a foothill. That ain't a mountain.
Yeah, yeah, I know.
You climb that
then
foothill,
you see the mountains.
and then you can see where you're going.
Yeah.
And then you go around this way for about like 8 miles, and then you're in. Cool. I'm exaggerating, obviously, but I forget how long. The trails are pretty extensive, though. They just keep on going, and it's beautiful. There's friends of mine that have over the years have done the whole thing, and man, I haven't had the time. I think it'd be fun.
You'd have to get one of those 6-shot
That's a commitment.
espressos, 6-shot
Right.
lattes first.
I might have to just get a backpack espresso machine, pack it in. So where were we at?
We were talking about Ben Tuen.
Ben Tuen, yes. Okay. And I have a vivid memory of old Ben Tuen. So every pair of glasses, Ben Tuen, as he got older, he needed glasses, and he was so tickled with, and you could tell that everything Ben Tuen wore was not even new to Ben.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, when Ben got it, I should say. He wore clothes that looked like the Salvation Army had thrown them out. He shopped at the Salvation Army all the time, and he loved it. And he was just thrifty, uninhibited old fella that he was completely. When I think of the one time that addiction, it's not addiction, but there is one. I was corrected by a dear friend on this that. That the word addiction is mentioned in the Bible one time. And now, of course, I can't remember where that's at. But if you look, it's actually addicted. And it's who have addicted themselves to the, my impression of Ben was he was just completely not preoccupied with anything around him. Mm-hmm. That was why he'd be just happy to, and he wasn't proud of it. He was just excited. Like, look, I found this, and it was like $3. And the same thing, his glasses, like he would hunt through glasses in the bin and pay 50 cents for a pair of reading glasses. And I remember him coming, riding with us to Sunday morning meeting during preps one year. Riding with us to Sunday morning meeting, got to Sunday morning meeting, did the whole pat. I forgot my glasses, and we were all just, wondering what came next. Do we need to run him back home? We rearranged this a little bit. Anyway, he looked over at Clarence Foods, our elder, because he saw he had these little half pipe ones on his nose, and he looked over at me and was like, "Do you have any extra glasses around?" And Clarence, yeah, I probably have a few pairs, and he went and rummaged around in a couple of drawers and came back with some bent up ones that he didn't use anymore or whatever. I mean, they're pretty old, and Ben just grabbed the first pair that looked like they'd fit him and jammed it on his nose. And close enough. Does anybody have a choice? And that was just Ben in a nutshell. He was uninhibited by worldly things to a large degree, and it was so you can't take and lump that in with the problem of funds being a problem. Mm-hmm. But there are, how many people are in jail for embezzlement? How many people commit financial crimes? Is it not a abundant human struggle. You know, I mean, probably more so than many other things, even maybe than the love of power. And it's really hard for people when there's all this bright, shiny stuff to say no. And even
So
if
there's
they
no
know it's wrong.
accountability like we talked about. So we're talking cash being turned over by the friends to the workers.
Correct.
And somewhere in the line between where it should go and where it actually goes, a worker makes that choice. Like,
Well, there was a moment in time. I'll just put it to you in the form of a story. There was another moment in time in my own experience there where as Dad was struggling, and the slander of him, you know, there was rumors being spread of him not paying taxes that was dishonest, because he'd gotten behind, as you do when you're running out of money. And that's one of the ways you can lose everything. And he didn't. He got caught up on those, and then it was made clear that if you're still there won't be convention this year. Didn't know what to do. Obviously, he'd been still trying to find a place and still trying to sell this place. But how do you do that in a month's time? You know, these things don't move lightning speed like that. So, well, I guess they kind of do around here. But there's a whole different world here than what I grew up in. Land sold slow and cheap where I grew up.
so was it the overseer that told him this, or?
Correct.
Okay. So just for clarity, the overseer thought that your dad was behind on taxes, and he was, but then he paid him.
Oh, he knew
Okay.
he knew he
So-
was, and I'm not sure how that knowledge came to be.
Okay.
Well,
Well, it is public.
It's
taxes
easy
are,
to
but-
look up,
Yeah.
and so it's something that it might have been something that came across his radar through somebody shopping back taxes. Who
Okay.
told him? I have no idea, but the point being that he, you know, there was some slander spread around it.
So because he was behind,
Yeah.
the overseer said you can't have convention here.
Well, yeah, he proclaimed. It was after, because at the moment in time when he said, because I remember this part distinctly, that at the moment in time when he said, if you're still there, we're not having convention there. We were caught up on those taxes. We
Yeah.
had paid the back taxes.
So
We
you were caught
current.
up, but then
We
he
were
still
current.
said,
But he said, because of your instability and dishonesty here, you have to go. And it kind of became a stand of principle. You know, it was a fairly prideful thing too, if I'm being honest. But it was a bit of a, you know, drawing that line in the sand. You go, or convention ain't gonna be yours, sort of a thing. And Wild West Showdown, sort of a thing.
so really that was the overseer's way of trying to get your
Yeah.
folks off the grounds.
Yeah, oh, absolutely. It
Okay.
was. Yeah, there was kind of a certain level of well, there was at one point a very high level of animosity from him toward Dad, because Dad wouldn't build the building he wanted, which is there now. And not that Dad was going to pay for it. I corrected that in the account that was out there, because I don't really believe that was the case. I think there was, because Dad, I mean, you're wringing blood out of a turnip at that point. There was no way he could have paid for it. But the point he didn't, the way he didn't want to fall into that trap was, well, number one, we profess to believe that we don't build churches, right? So to him, that was a church. That wasn't right. Why are we doing this? And so he questioned that, which isn't popular. And he also, you know, had a vested interest in not having that and resisting that, because he couldn't afford what was already there.
And the taxes that would come with a building of that
and
cost.
insurance.
Did
Absolutely.
your, so Colton said in his letter your dad had mentioned how many stained glass windows he wanted. Was that
at one point? Yeah.
Is that true?
Yes. At one point, Dad teased him to that effect.
I think that's hilarious, but it really, the reason I asked
it
is
was
because
not well received. You didn't laugh like you did.
yeah. Well, the reason I asked is because after Colton's letter had come out, somebody had told me that wasn't true that he said that, and I just wanted to clarify to your memory. I think it's.
Can I
Go ahead.
ask that, was that on the worker side of the conversation there that was denounced?
It was a worker that said, I don't know how much I want to. I don't want to throw anybody under the bus.
Yeah, no.
It was a worker that said somebody close to your parents said that wasn't true. Anyways,
well, that's what I'm. The reason I'm questioning that is there was only a few people there, and they were all me and mom and dad.
Yeah,
and maybe my older brother.
Okay, but the point that I want to make is
so
that
I'm kind of curious as to who could have been there to refute this.
I can tell you after
some fly on the wall.
But the point I want to make about that
robots now
is that's a great statement because you're absolutely right. That building that was built on the convention grounds was built 100% solely for convention.
Certainly. There was no other point.
And so how is that any different?
We didn't need any other buildings, and there's no rental market out there that you could convince people to drive it's a 40-mile, roughly, one-way trip from the biggest, from Rapid City out there, and about 20 miles of that is gravel.
Mm-hmm. I drove that. I counted the curves because I drove it every day to school.
Sure you did.
And if I went by Hart Ranch, there's 75 curves in that 25 miles.
You learn how to corner a car as a kid.
Oh, I know how to drive on gravel.
Yeah. You learn how to steer into the skid, don't you?
Yeah. But anyways, okay. So the point of the fact that your dad said that speaks volumes to me because that building is specifically for convention. It doesn't matter if there's storage in there.
So you're saying that you ended up witnessing the stained glass window effect?
Well, no.
Okay, I'm just kidding.
I'm gonna put this down. My arm's getting tired holding it up. I'm gonna put this down here, maybe. See if it
makes us look enormous.
Okay, are we both in it? Here, I'll sit down here.
All right.
So, okay.
Well, now you're lower than me. I gotta fix that.
So the point I want to make is that what your dad said, how many stained glass windows, is profound in the way that he could see that defeats the purpose of we don't have a church building. Right?
Well, it was, on its face, it was a church building. And so if you're going to, and that's happened across the United States, you can, I mean, I don't need to, I don't need to even point that out. It's so obvious at this point. But
I want to add something. There's nothing wrong with doing that.
Right. The problem that's wrong is it's the same as Ananias and the names you said earlier, they're eluding me now, but the two that gave.
Oh, Ananias and Sapphira.
Ananias and Sapphira, thank you. The two that gave, it wasn't wrong that they gave, and it wasn't wrong that they only gave this much.
Yeah.
What was wrong is they represented
lied about
that they were doing something they weren't.
There you go. So what's wrong is that we don't have a church building because we're like the first century church. That's what's wrong about doing it. There's nothing wrong about having a building to gather in.
Right.
That's what a church is. Now, are some of them unnecessarily fancy? Absolutely. I'm not going to... But
put it in that context when it's that official like that, and everything has to be transparent now because everyone's watching and everyone. I shouldn't say everyone. I'm generalizing, but there are churches that get way out of what's right, and it becomes all about money and there's secrets and so on and so forth. But it's at the same time we have I feel like what the scrutiny that has been applied to all the worldly churches, if we just applied that to ourselves, we wouldn't be here. But that was kind of part of the point. Condemning other gatherings, speaking against them, and not. It's the same old thing. It's a group think of the same thing that we do ourselves. We get started pointing out someone else's faults and forget about our own, right? So, yeah.
Okay, so your dad said he wasn't in favor of building the building.
Well, it's hard to say where his head would have been at on it had the original agreement been honored.
Okay.
Because I think it was,
As far as
I
the
don't
workers
think he
helping
felt-
out.
Right. I think he felt like it was. I think he felt like it was out of order and unnecessary and out of alignment with what we claimed that we were doing. And
Yep.
so I think
So it's more of the fundamental side of it.
the fundamental
than-
side of it didn't set well with him.
Yeah.
I can guarantee that.
Than the financial burden that would have came with it.
The financial thing, to him, it was just a complete no-go.
Yeah.
Even had he been okay with the other side of it,
Mm-hmm.
he couldn't do it.
Yeah.
So,
Okay,
and
so
he
what
had no
happened-
guarantee that anything was going to change.
Yeah. So
Why would
for, let's say for nearly 20 years, they hadn't had help.
So at the point when that happened, when the building, the pursuit of that building, it would have started somewhere in the mid to late mid 90s. Yeah, it would have started somewhere in the mid 90s. Maybe 94 or 5, somewhere in there.
So, and the
really
overseer was
started
Joe
being
Hobbs
pushed.
at the time.
Correct.
And so he wanted it. That was kind of
Well, so it was brought. I want to say, and bear in mind, I was pretty young then, and so the details I couldn't guarantee, but it runs in my mind that before Joe even there was talk of,
okay.
Is this a possibility? Could we do this? It was when it came around to Joe, there was a definite tone shift in terms of this is going to happen.
Yeah. Okay.
And with or without you, and if you're not going to make it happen, then you need to go.
So that was kind of okay. So the taxes, the back taxes issue was kind of Joe's like, okay, this is why you're leaving.
Yeah, that was
kind of the final.
His validation for here's what's wrong with you. Here's why you must go now.
Okay.
And then it became the reason I brought that whole onion up was to peel back to the layer of this would have been. I don't remember the date, the year, but some people might. And this is something that would be landmarkish in a lot of local friends' history, because there was something that happened that marked that year, and that was that Joe decided to have convention at a Methodist church camp.
So this was the year he said, I wasn't around, but I do remember,
Okay.
I think I remember hearing something about
that was something that everybody was like, what?
This was the year he said you can't have convention at your place?
Right. You can't have convention if you're still there. And Dad said, well, I remember him having that conversation that we've caught up on everything. We're trying to be what we should be, sort of a thing. No, it doesn't matter if you're still there. And it took a lot of, circular conversation to finally get that out. But it came down to Dad finally had to say it. And he said, okay, so what you're saying is if we're still here, there won't be convention here. Yeah. That's what he meant. Okay.
So we had
it out that's what he was talking about, and Dad's, we're trying to get out of your hair, but I don't know if we'll be able to do that in this time frame. We'll try.
So in other words, Joe said, move, or we're not having convention.
Precisely. And so then it became the Methodist church camp convention year.
Now you told me about that on the phone.
I did. Okay. I didn't remember if I had.
But give a brief.
So it went as far as to have some little leaflets printed up that got handed out at gospel meeting. Florence Bullock handed us a little.
So you found out about it at gospel meeting?
We had an idea about it somehow before, I think. Yeah, because it had been talked about already somewhat before.
Okay.
Because I remember when, one thing I remember is Clarence would have made the stained glass comment too.
Clarence a good guy.
Yeah, he would have made the stained glass comment too. He's a very solid man, yes. And his family as well. And I've been very pleasantly surprised lately to find that it has carried right on down the lineage.
Yeah. So this is already a part 2. This is already going to be a 2-part video, I'm sure, which is fine.
You should just pare it down. It really only needs to be 20 minutes.
We'll pare it down a little bit, but it's going to be a 2-part video. Okay, so let's get back to...
Just cut out a lot.
Let's get back to... the workers tried to get your folks off the convention grounds for years, really.
Right, and at that point, the reason I brought that up was at that point when they were handed out. So I remember Clarence, that's why I said the stained glass comment.
Mm-hmm.
He would have said the stained glass comment too, because I remember Clarence. He was shaking hands just ahead of us, and Florence Bullock hands him this paper, and he's like, "Oh, is this for that Methodist convention?" You know? And then he takes it on, and she didn't really want to address that. So
that's right. That's where we were. So convention was at a Methodist church camp.
It was going to be, and it was going to cost everybody to park a camper. Meals were going to cost money, things like that. Like it wasn't the same, and it was kind of like, obviously it wasn't the same, but I mean it was a much more expensive trip for a lot of people, and a lot of people were very put off by it.
The friends would have to pay to go to convention, essentially, for meals.
Pay to park their camper and pay for for meals. And
was there a place for them to stay there?
I don't think there was. I could be wrong in that. I don't remember for sure. But there may have been.
Okay.
There may have been. I shouldn't really speak to that confidently because I don't honestly remember.
Okay. Now, you told me something on the phone about that was interesting.
Which part? The part that Clarence called and pretended. So it was just the simplest thing in the world. It was awesome, but it was like Clarence, he just called he just called the Methodist Church and started telling them that if I brought a group of this size to for this many days and so on and so, we needed lodging and food, and the lady on the phone was just sweet as pie, and she was like, "Oh, there's quite a demand for this. I guess we just had another request for that. We're actually doing that for another group." And so that makes it easy. You kind of laid out the same groundwork. It'd vary a little bit, but we'll give you I'll just quote you what we quoted them. And it was $30,000. And that was in somewhere back somewhere mid 90s, 96, 97 maybe. Again, somebody may remember it exactly, and somebody may still have that goofy flyer that got passed out. I think we probably burned it right away, but I kind of wish I still had it.
So 30,000, okay. So
that was a lot of money in that time. I mean,
that's a lot of money today.
That's a lot of money today.
Plus, that didn't even include the meals, right? Because the people had to pay for...
I do believe that was... Maybe that covered, like, their...
Oh, you said maybe one or two meals or something, maybe.
I think there was one or... That's what it was. I'm sorry, because I misspoke here, but I think I told you correctly on the phone. I think there was, like, you were responsible for your own breakfast or something, but then they would do lunch and supper or something like that, maybe. Something along those lines.
But regardless... To prove a point, it cost $30,000 minimum to have convention somewhere else that year.
Well, plus the money out of everyone else's pocket if they wanted to bring a camper or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so...
And to prove the point that, at that point in time, to put it into... part of me still hates doing that, but to put numbers on it, because I feel like there's especially for the younger crowd, everything's been so horribly expensive in our lifetime that it's easy to forget where we're at in terms of inflation. But in that day and time, it wasn't uncommon for lots of people in the area I grew up in. They made less than $20,000 a year, many of them.
At that time.
At that time, yeah, absolutely. And so $30,000 in that era was a decent, stable 9-to-5 job in a good, solid company with lots of benefits. That was easily $75,000 today.
So
$80,000 probably today. And it wasn't, it wasn't wealthy income, but it was good, solid working man income. And so $30,000 in a time when that was more than a lot of people's yearly take home. And those taxes were, as we discussed, easily, taxes and insurance stack up to easily half that. And then if utilities don't get paid on top of that, and obviously that's probably the least of your worries, but.
So the point of that is, and then convention went back to your place though after that.
Well, yeah, there was a conversation, and they beseeched a conversation with Barkley.
Okay.
And he stepped in and said, "This is egregious and shouldn't be happening," and actually responded pretty admirably at that time. Mm-hmm.
But okay, so the point of that is.
But the next time they needed him, he couldn't remember who they were, or the previous
Barkley.
Conversation.
Okay, I'm glad we got that cleared up, because we don't want him to get too much credit.
Well, I'm thankful for what he did. I was thankful for what he did at the time.
Yeah.
It seemed like that he heard the cry and understood the wrong and was moved to do something. Yeah. In a righteous manner. And but the tragedy of this is, we see it in the account of Leslie White. That's the one that immediately comes to mind, but there's others of him repeating that having that issue of, it's easy to get fired up about it. And we've seen that. He's not alone in that. I'm not picking on him specifically, because that's just back to the repeatability of the human nature. It's always the same. We see that now. I think there was a certain zeal, a certain righteous indignation, a certain anger even, to, this is wrong and we've got to fix it. Mm-hmm. And how quickly that fire fizzles out when you realize there's a cost. Yeah. But you realize we have to separate ourselves from some things that, that's going to hurt a little bit. And then people kind of...
But the awful part about that story is that instead of Joe saying, "Here, let me help this year and we're going to pay half the taxes."
Well, he didn't earn that $30,000.
Yeah. Well, okay. So, but the fact that your parents were struggling, and understandably, it's not their fault, right? It's not your parents' fault that
Colton spoke to one thing very accurately. Dad worked harder than any two people I've ever known. Mm-hmm. And it was not for lack of trying.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the point I want to make is they spent $30,000, which, let's say taxes were $10,000 a year. I don't know, whatever. Maybe they weren't quite that much then, but that could have paid a couple years worth of help. Easily. But instead it was allocated to a Methodist church camp.
And it never happened because of the Barry Barkley getting involved.
Oh, so they didn't actually
go through.
Okay.
No, it got moved back to the Hermosa grounds even for that year. Okay. Mm-hmm.
But still, regardless, it's crazy.
Oh, there's somebody else coming. Yeah, it is. It's just kind of it was quite a big aha moment of, you kind of knew. Yeah, so, it's kind of, I guess, some of the things, and even down to the whole, desire for authority over others in God's name. We've seen that laid bare a lot. Mm-hmm. We have individuals among the ministry trying to reach out to those who are in these rebel meetings and, convince them that these people are bad and you have to go. Mm-hmm. If you want to be saved, you got to get out of there. And I've, personally attended one of them, and it's a wonderful experience. It was some of the most uncomplicated fellowship I've had in a long time, because many people would and do reach the presumption that, oh, they're just going to be talking about us in there, So no, it wasn't like that at all. And it won't be when you really stop and think about it, because you're trying to get away from that.
Mm-hmm.
You're trying to leave that behind, and you're trying to stop thinking like that and start drawing closer to God and focusing again on Jesus and leaving the formality.
I don't think you can say focusing again on Jesus even, because
Yeah, not really.
I think the
true.
shift goes from focusing on the workers, the logistics, and focusing on Christ. That is the shift, right?
Well, and for many of us, myself included, I haven't felt like I was following the workers. That's the thing here that I'm trying to articulate, is that there's a point to this. It's kind of like there are many people who haven't been following the workers, and yet now we have this demand for, we are in charge. Well, what do you mean?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there has to be order. Well, this has been chaos. It's not order.
Mm-hmm.
And how do we, it's some have made it abundantly clear that they have felt like we need to follow them. And it's not put in that exact context, but I put it to anyone who wants to speculate on it. So pick the most loyal, faithful people that you can think of who are divorced and remarried, and they come to your meeting. Do they take part? No. Why not?
The workers told them they can't.
Right. Do you think if they went and told the workers, we feel moved to take part, that they would say, well, then by all means, go ahead. I'm sorry. I shouldn't have said anything. No, that won't happen here. And it's it's because of a whole variety of different reasons, and some people will find verses and back it up. But my point is that is a controlled dynamic.
Correct. And thanks for bringing that up. I don't want to say that folks that go to meetings I don't want to blanket everybody that goes to meetings that doesn't put the focus on Jesus. But the doctrine that's taught in meetings denies Christ's deity. And so it's so easy that isn't the case. It's easy for people to be worshiping the religion and not Jesus. And so, but for like yourself, has your relationship with Christ changed in the last couple of years? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So,
absolutely.
So you're coming out of a lot of this mindset, and even if you weren't a worship worker, and I assume that most people were because I was. That's the way I was raised.
Sure.
But a lot of people weren't.
Well, I think it's clear from that account that we just talked about that we weren't raised that way, and I'm thankful for that. And my grandparents weren't either. They did not see it that way. There was, and even for people who don't worship the workers, I think there is a certain reverence there. Mm-hmm. And
well, they're God's chosen elect.
Right, and some will tell you that.
Yeah.
And that gets troubling. But here's the other thing: is that there's a fine point I'd like to put on something there. Honestly, is that, and this isn't meant to be nasty. It's just I've heard this phrase bandied about of well, you remember that you should esteem them for their work's sake. Well, I listened to a worker sit in Manhattan and bragged to us all about how he barred a young man from professing because he was pushing his mother's and sister's buttons too much. The horrifying thing to me in that is that I sat there and nodded and listened to it like, yeah. Didn't even hear it.
So the worker decided
he told him, you're not ready
worthy
yet because your works are unbecoming of a child of God. So and he was proud to tell us that his analysis was correct, because the boy never did come to serve God. Well, you just shoved him away from God.
I think it was Michael's.
How did you decide it was okay to put yourself in between him and God in the first place? That's the bigger problem here. And see that not being raised worker worship-y, coining a new phrase here. I didn't feel like I needed to ask a worker if I could profess. I just stood up. And that's why I spoke to that earlier about the whole time before that actual deed of standing up. I didn't speak in meeting. I didn't talk to anyone about it. But God had laid his hand on my heart 1.5 years before I ever stood up in a convention. And I just stood up in a convention because I thought this was how you express that. And it worked for me at the time, and even to some degree to this day. It was a public declaration of what was already going on in my heart. And the dread was the hard part of the standing up before people. So it was just, I'm thankful that my own experience was that pure and that direct with my Heavenly Father, because I can see how people get that really tangled up especially when they're encouraged to do so. And if they're a little kid and they're encouraged to tangle that up and run it through a filter of other people's opinions, oh my word.
Yeah.
It would have been a disaster. I mean, I can see with the energy level I have, the headstrong idiocy that's part of my own nature, I would have probably been one of those who just decided this was all false and forsook God for a time. And that would have been horrible. But, I mean, that's speculation, obviously. But, I can understand how damaging that would be. It would be horribly damaging to me, and I'm so thankful it was not my lot.
Yeah.
And I really feel for those who were exposed to anything like that. Oh, there's that little chipmunk again. He's running around here. Did you get him?
A couple of them. I don't know if he'll pick it up.
He's
running down the trail.
See the movement, but man, they blend in.
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know how much more you want to share about the Hermosa story, because you did write a really good letter, an account
Which
of
we
it.
pretty much covered, honestly.
Yeah, we covered a lot of it.
We hit the high spots.
And I think, one thing that you and I talked about is, and I'm not going to go into a ton of detail, but I just want to say a couple things. Now, most of this would have been told by my parents after I left meetings. And we don't have the greatest relationship, unfortunately. But I do know that the financial strain as far as taxes and insurance and stuff, that they have to, they do pay for that. I can't say that they don't get any help. I know there's a couple of things that they have had help on, and as far as the actual function of convention and stuff, I know they didn't pay for the building that was built. But I do know that, taxes are, like you said, tax insurance probably in the neighborhood of $20,000, I don't know, a year. And so I do know that, Dad has to work to be able to pay for that. And I know to them, it's their contribution to it. And so they have no hard feelings about doing that.
No, it's not like they...
And I'm sure that was
problem
with your parents too. Like,
yeah,
it wasn't...
that's why they didn't complain, and they didn't, they didn't say, hey, this wasn't the... And if you know Dad, you know that he would never be like, this wasn't the arrangement we agreed to.
Yeah.
He might have gently hinted at it at some point and been told that wasn't his place to talk about or something. And I don't know. I don't want to ascribe nasty intentions to somebody, but he might have been kind of not heard or shut down and just didn't really want to speak to it again. And and there's a lot of that mentality where it's something we don't talk about, and that's created a problem because that's how we end up with some of the consequences we have ended up with. And
but to that point, and I remember my mom calling one time, and she's like, the county adjuster came out and counted all the toilets, and like it is a big commercial.
That's when
facility,
it went from bad to worse,
right?
Yep.
So I know there's still stress and things of that nature for the maintenance.
Yeah.
But okay, so the point that I want to get to now, which we've kind of alluded at a little bit, is some stories, and I don't know how much you're willing to share on the interview here, but some stories of other convention grounds and this, what'd you call it? Shady fun?
Shadowy fun?
Shadowy funds. So let's walk back to your car and let's talk a little bit about that.
Sure.
If you're okay on some things
To some
now.
degree. I mean, I obviously don't know a lot outside of my own experience, but
Well, you've heard some things that
there's some very good accounts.
We can put
well-written.
an asterisk of not confirmed on this,
Certainly. Yeah.
but you've heard some things that made my jaw drop. As far as what?
Oh, good.
And so let's,
I was like, what's that?
if you're willing to share.
You may have to remind me.
Okay, so the Manhattan Convention Ground. The funds available for, I don't know, is that specifically for the convention or just kind of in this area in general? Or do you not want to talk about it?
Oh, that I don't know. I honestly don't know. I'm I don't know that that I can speak to it too accurately.
Okay.
I think it's for so I know that it was I know that it was spoken of. And again, so here's the shadowy part. We're in that unconfirmable realm, and which is honestly where it's still at with, like, you could claim anything when there's just cash changing hands.
Yeah.
And so
But-
if there's no transparency, you really can't argue one way or the other.
So you had mentioned, and tell me if I can take this out if I'm talking out of place.
Okay.
You had mentioned an individual who was fairly wealthy businessman had donated to the workers significant amount of money. And I think that happens quite often.
Oh,
right?
I think
so.
absolutely.
If you have the means, a lot of times they do. And then he found out about a fund that was already there.
That had way more in it.
Yeah.
Yes, correct. And basically it was like giving, again, back to the point, when it's misrepresented, when there's not open truth and transparency, it's like you weren't giving to a need. I mean, it's more akin to, some sort of a mutual backscratch, political arrangement than anything else that we are familiar with, because it's, if you're putting your, you did really well for a period of time, and you're putting your six-figure donation, if you have it, say, into an account that you don't even realize that it already has $5 million in there. Well, the interest alone, if that was interest bearing, is like, anyway, my point is, there's not a need. There wasn't a need.
There wasn't a need. Okay. So the reason why I think this is interesting to bring up is there's people like your folks that struggled.
Right.
That could have, there was a need. Right.
There was a need. And I really love what you said about it when we were talking about it, because my brother has spoken to some of these things before. But it didn't reach the ears of hardly anyone until it coincided perfectly with Mom and Dad's need. And in terms of that, I know you mentioned at one point that it'd be nice to update anyone watching on where that has gone.
Yeah, how your folks are. And
Struggle still going on there, because it's there are many wonders. So they're trying to find a place that they can settle into, hopefully long term. But yes, people have helped incredibly and are still helping incredibly, and so it's not. There's a huge debt of gratitude to so many they would want everyone to know that they're extremely thankful. The embarrassment was hard. I know that. It was very
Well, it's hard to accept help.
for them to. Well, it was hard for them to even have these things be made known.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
there's a certain. I don't know why, but even though they didn't perpetuate any of this, and they were just more victims in it than anything, there's a guilt that comes with it, and it's sad that that's so, but we can understand that. So it's not a mystery, and it is there, but it's they've adjusted well. I'm thankful. My sister has helped them a lot in that regard too, and help them to understand that, look, you need help, and you really don't have a choice, and God is providing, and you need to accept that. And don't we all arrive there at varying levels, at varying points in our life, and we think we're done, and then we're back again.
Yeah.
And that doesn't change until we die. It's been made clear to me that there's always going to be some point where you have to swallow the pride that you realize has welled back up again.
Yeah.
And
but so
admit you need help.
Going back to the point though, when help was needed, back in the day,
Right.
too, there's these funds that the workers have. We'll say it's the workers' money. I don't know. Was that what you would call it?
That's what it's become. I think it was probably put aside. And I think one of the biggest driving forces has been, like healthcare expenses, things like that. That's kind of how we have. I think it's safe to say that's probably the rationale under which a lot of it was accumulated.
Okay.
Initially, I could easily see that happening.
So, yeah.
But it's turned into, European tours and first class flights all over. Well, not first class, but you know what I mean. Airplane flights all over the place. And it's like, how many average working men can just go grab a plane ticket and be somewhere tomorrow buying it at the counter? You realize that half the time that's out of here, that's like $1,500. So
there's these funds that are being misallocated, right? The longer you're in the work, the more you get to travel. Is
that a thing?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean you get.
It's like you earn privileges. I see.
And and again, there's nothing wrong with a lot of things that they do, but what's wrong is that they're masquerading as a poor, homeless ministry.
Right.
And the help that needs to be, the need that's there is not getting the help it needs.
Well, and just like there are many antichrists, there are many demons that rear their ugly heads in combination with money. I mean, that possession takes so many forms that we wouldn't have time to cover it in a week-long video. And why would we? But that's just, the fact that my parents had a need and were suffering while there was millions accumulating over here, whatever. That's just one facet of the whole, of the whole big ugly picture of.
Well, there's a pattern that you see. There's
Absolutely.
a pattern of misappropriation of money and funds, and why wouldn't there be if there's no accountability?
Well, that's what I said before. Yeah, the opportunity is rife, and we know from just dealing with humanity on a general level, how many people end up not being able to say no to temptation involving money, and then you add to that a lack of accountability and someone now held in kind of a high esteem, like you couldn't do any wrong and everybody expects that, and you're trying to exude that image, trying to portray that image and stand by it. And it's not that there's anything wrong with trying to be righteous. That's wonderful. Lying to pretend that you're righteous is where we get into Ananias and Sapphira's problem and reinvent the wheel.
What's crazy is this conversation boils down to, and this is the friends and workers. This is was our identity, and as many of our,
well,
this is our entire life.
And I think for me, like I said, it's like it's kind of been more along the lines of there was things that I was ignorant of, obviously, plenty of those, but there was some of these big fundamental doctrinal issues that I didn't realize were an issue because I didn't think we were viewing it that way. I think that's the simplest way to put it.
You're right.
And now it's been called out. Yep, nope, that's the way it is. Bam. And it's like, now it's an elephant in the room with a name. And I can't ignore it. And I can't say, well, okay, I do believe that. I agree with that. No, I can't. When it does not align with God's word, and when it's doing the damage it's doing, and it's, and back to what you said earlier, to the point of what you said earlier, there's a common dismissal among people right now. Probably the most common dismissal that, well, along with the God will just take care of it. He'll clean our plate for us. Clean the inside of our cup and saucer for us. Maybe that's the better analogy. But he, along with that one is the other one that it's being taken care of. Anyone who's still believing that, you're deceiving yourself, because as we've just been discussing, it's still going on. It's really easy to say, oh, it's, that was back then, right? So, and to that testament, anyone who's interested wants to look up Gilroy Convention. Read the accounts of I believe it was I think it's Bell, was there? Okay, I'm going to probably misquote that, so don't hold me to that. But okay. I know Bernita Woodward has become a very respected friend of mine. In communication, and I've never met her, but I have read these accounts, and the crazy thing is they're part and parcel the same exact thing, the same exact story, different place, different valuation. $400,000 property. Well, an $800,000 property being sold for $4. Things like that, and numbers being set by people who don't have any business in the middle of it. And for what? And the whole dynamic was very much the same, right down to the slander. When he refused to move this thing into the next level church, he was then touted about town as being dishonest somehow. Even though usually these people, which I can vouch to that nobody's 100% honest. So why would we quibble about that? But my dad I've watched him give himself the short end of the stick on every single thing he's ever. I mean, he worked on something for you. He charged you for 2 hours when he worked on it for 4. He was just always. We've known people like that. It's just he was always opening himself up to be taken advantage of, even, and people did that. It's a tragedy of the world we live in that people would embrace the opportunity, but anyway, that's the choking irony of the fact that then you've got people running around, but that's also why you've got someone running around, trying to sell everyone on the fact that this guy's dishonest, when they're like, that's not my experience with him at all. And so that has been very, very telling in the expressions of outrage that what was that? And the expressions of, well, not really outrage, but just that must have been a bird or something.
Might have been a nighthawk.
Yeah, it sounded like a nighthawk. That's exactly what it sounded like. That's why it's familiar. Anyway, the expressions of people who have spoken up now, I had a lot of people reach out to me and say, I'm glad I know the rest of the story. It didn't make sense before. I didn't believe the narrative. And they were right. Their gut, their heart was telling them telling them that something
Yeah,
something didn't add
wasn't
up.
quite right. Yeah.
Yeah. So, but yeah, Gilroy convention.
Very similar story.
Experienced almost everything down to you change the names, change the places, and change the times, and it was almost identical. And one of the most heartbreaking things about that is when you realize most of us told ourselves, "Would you like some water? I have plenty. I have another drip down there."
I've got a little bit of water in my coffee.
Gotcha. Are you good? Most of us told ourselves, and that was how that was a survivable thing. It was one of the things that helped make it survivable. We had ourselves convinced that it's just one man that's gotten off track, one man that took a wrong road, one man that got a little greedy, got a little proud, or
God's way is perfect, but
got a
the
little
people
churchy.
aren't.
Yeah. So this is one of the imperfect ones, even though everybody else was telling us, no, he's perfect, but or not perfect, but still better than the rest of us. So it's one of those jarring realizations that I have had that, it wasn't one. There wasn't one Joe Hobbs. There was lots of Joe Hobbses.
Yeah, there's a lot of similarities, and I think we'll see probably a lot more too, or stories come out over time.
Well, I know of one that has really, and I'm not going to reveal anything more to that. Is this what made the noise?
Is he not moving?
He is not moving. I wonder if he's a baby or if he's not feeling good. Interesting. I have never seen one of these not move. Well, I don't want to.
Grouse?
Yeah, I believe that's a partridge. Actually, we have a. I might be. Somebody will probably want to correct me on that because I don't really know, but I think we have lots of Hungarian partridges around here, and I think that's what somebody once quote. We'll just go. We got two roads, so if he's not feeling well, or he's liking his warm rocks, we'll just let him be. Oh, look, there's another.
Oh yeah.
And they're probably protecting a nest. That's probably what's going on.
So, we've gotten towards the end of our battery on our camera.
That's why it's looking a little pale there.
So if there's anything that we haven't covered yet that you want to cover before the battery dies,
now would be the time.
now is the time. We probably have a little while. But
Okay, good. Yeah, what were we? Oh, so I was just going to say that to speak to the point you made. There's one account that I was just made aware of very recently. That someone who just finally started speaking out in the last couple weeks, and that one's. I mean, it's getting hard to deny for even the most stoic of deniers at this point. So it's just, and that one I'm not at liberty to say any details. It's private to that individual whether they want to disclose anything to more people than already has been. But
well, I think
I hope they are assured that they can, that it becomes more common knowledge even now. Because
let's go back to what we briefly talked about a little bit, is that it's the fruit. What has happened, whether it's the CSA, SA, financial fraud,
or thrusting people away from God. Because we're
the control.
Yep.
I mean, it's sex, money, and power, which is crazy to say about this, right? Like, think about it.
It's not anymore. I mean, it makes perfect sense. They're all there. But it's like, Yeah, you're exactly right.
But we're talking about this church that appears to be perfect, you know, and that this is the only true way. But anyways, it's the root of the problem is the foundation, the doctrinal foundation. So if there isn't a foundation on Christ, if the identity is in the logistics of meetings and not on Christ, then the fruit becomes this.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's no different than any other religion that this happens into.
And there's just, one of the things that I would say is that we can never let someone talk us out of the words of Jesus. Mm-hmm. And how else do you understand that when he said, there will be false prophets among you, mm-hmm. and you'll know them by their fruits. So when the fruit is rotten, you know, and I think there's a big gap in understanding there. Because there's everybody then clamoring and rioting about, and I shouldn't generalize like this, but people who would defend the, what should we call, there's a name that has been given by some, but just superfessors, which
the elite, yeah.
Yeah, somebody called them superfessors once, and I thought that was kind of funny. But it's like, so someone, and that's just defining someone who is determined to justify any amount of red flags and exposing, to try to cling to, nope, this was always okay. Mm-hmm. I would speak to the fact that why is it so hard for so many of us to accept that that there would be false prophets? Jesus spoke to that. He warned us of that. Mm-hmm. And I think some of it is the finality of it. You know, I think there are a lot of words of Jesus that are hard to accept, and and our human nature would kick against that one for sure. But I've been moved to examine that in myself for myself, not because because for me that one hasn't been a big struggle, but I see how much of a struggle it is for so many. Mm-hmm. And I don't say that in a condescending way. It just really is.
And give clarity on what do you mean? Who's the false prophet?
Well, that's a really good question, isn't it? That's where this is going. Okay. Who's the false prophet? So, if your fruit's rotten, you're not following, like when I was following alcohol, mm-hmm. that produces some pretty rotten fruit.
Rotten fruit produces alcohol.
It does. Isn't that quite a cycle of life? I hadn't thought of this. That's funny. Okay, but anyway, that would produce some pretty rotten fruit. But did that mean I was beyond hope?
No.
Did that mean I was beyond help? A false prophet is someone who is pushing the wrong agenda. Mm-hmm. I mean, that's the simple modern day terminology to put it in, whether it's in the name of money or in the name of sex or in the name of any of the other things. Mm-hmm. The millions of other things that you can fall into, you know, love of power and control, yeah. Maybe, or an obsession of the same or some such. Any of that you're bringing in another god, mm-hmm. and now you're teaching something that's not sound by the doctrine of the real God. Mm-hmm. So you're talking about if you're peddling false doctrine, you're a false prophet. Mm-hmm. And that can be what everybody has always made it to be, and somebody who's, like we talked about earlier, who's spreading some free-for-all message that mm-hmm. you can just do whatever.
Or it can be much more subtle than that.
It can be much more subtle than that. And so, by that context, who do we know who at one point in time was a false prophet?
Well, I know a lot of people.
Right. And are they? Is that condemnation? That's the thing I really would wish that people would examine. I mean, because for myself, that has been huge to really realize that. And one of the things that tipped it was there's a young brother worker who stepped away from it all and said, I'm not going to be party to this. Took a break that became permanent, as so many have. And one of the things he said publicly was that sometimes I think that God is doing all of this just to try to save the workers. And, it just, like, that was just such a explosion to me to just suddenly, like, realize.
So I want to say something.
You can get amped up about all the wrong.
Yeah.
And you can speak, and you cannot be party to wrong. We know that. We can't be supporting that. But
I don't want to throw all the workers in the same category.
No. And I'm speaking.
And I'm not saying you are.
I'm speaking in that to those who have become false prophets.
Yeah.
Right? So we're talking specifically, and the person I keep referring to that I was trying to get you to guess is
Joe.
Paul. When he was Saul, was that not a false prophet? He was a religious zealot, murdering God's people.
Yeah, he was definitely on the wrong side.
That's not an agenda of God. And he believed wrong.
And we can use the term, let's see, I don't know if...
And you can cut that out if it horrifies you to put that out there publicly.
No,
but
we can use
to me,
the term...
become such a vibrant thing to think of that, God violently turned around a false prophet.
Yeah. Well, and the word prophet would mean somebody who speaks for God, and like God reveals something to them and speaks for them.
True.
So another term, I guess, would be, well, let's just say Pharisee. That's a good term too.
Right. Right.
We were, well, let's go one step further.
Yeah.
Let's go sinner. All right. That puts every human being in the same boat.
True.
Okay? We fall short of the glory of God. That's a present tense term. We fall short. We used to fall short, or we're going to fall short. That is present term, a present tense term. So we constantly fall short of the glory of God, and that's why we need a Savior. Okay? So we're all in the same boat. Now, as a believer, we're no longer labeled as a sinner. We're labeled a saint. Okay? Look in the New Testament and find one place where we're labeled a sinner as a believer. There, you won't find one. Right.
No, it is true.
Okay, so we don't want to live that we're just an old sinner saved by grace. That's not where we want to live. We are transformed by Christ. We're transformed. We're a new creation. Okay, but the point I'm making is we can put ourselves all in a boat that we were once a sinner. We can put ourselves, at least us, most of us who've gone to meetings, that we were Pharisees.
You're right.
Does that mean we're beyond? And I think this is the point that you were getting to. Does that mean that we are beyond the point of conversion?
Right.
Are we beyond the hope of glory that God gave us in Jesus Christ?
And which is why this turns into, if that's the expectation, then you can see how this can turn into this desperate, well, it's all or nothing. Well, and we can't address the truth, even if it's hitting us right between the eyes, because it means accepting something that we don't want to be true, or it means accepting something that we feel is then hopeless. Is that, am I stating that accurately? That's what I think. What I'm trying to articulate is that if we, like there's so much of that push that, well, the ministry still always has to be right. Well, all of the ministry always has to be right all of the time. That's impossible, and it has been impossible. And then, well, that gets dismissed with well, they're human. Okay, let's acknowledge that they're human, and keep it that way. And one of the biggest issues that I've had with it all is this running around managing people situation, you know, it's a that's a problem, and I don't.
Yeah,
I don't see how that leads back down any road except for the one we've just come up.
Yeah.
And it's akin to refusing to grow, refusing to mature spiritually.
All right, so we're down to 5%. So
we killed it.
I just want to wrap this up, and I really appreciate you taking the time this afternoon visiting. I know it's difficult. It was a hard decision for you because of a lot of different things.
Yeah.
And it's a hard decision for a lot of people. I have people emailing me that say, hey, I want to share my story, but I'm terrified.
Right.
And so, but, you know, I can understand, I can relate to a certain aspect of, you know, we all can, of what we've come out of. And by that, just meaning the legalistic side of things and the appearance side of things and all that goes with that. But I really appreciate you taking the time to visit and share your story. And you're a talker, so we could have gone on forever, but
we could. Yeah, but why?
But it's been great.
We probably already bored most everybody to death anyway, or at least I did.
No, they'll be on the edge of their seats.
Doubtful. Doubtful, but no, it's.
And what was even cooler is we got to be out in God's creation. You know, I just want to say one thing that has nothing to do with this interview, but
okay.
I've been thinking about it a lot the last few weeks, so I might as well say it now. The scripture points, Jesus says, you search the scripture, but you refuse to come to me, and I am the one that gives eternal life. The scripture points to the Savior, okay?
It does.
So, okay, I gotta skip some things because the batteries died. The creation points to a creator. Creation points to the Savior. Jesus said these rocks would cry out and give me the glory and worship me. Everything points to Jesus. The scripture, the creation, everything points to Christ.
Yeah.
And that's just amazing.
It is. Yeah.
All right, so the old GoPro died after 4 hours of footage.
Is that all?
We'll cut it down a little bit, I'm sure, but anyway, so you were just mentioning that you had some final thoughts, though.
Yeah, it's just one thing that I wish that I wish that more people realized, and sadly, people that are struggling with that may not ever watch this. But the thought being, how this conversation has developed, because that's been a confusion, I think, for many.
The reason why I'm here today, right?
Not just that. I mean, by that I don't mean the way the conversation developed for me alone, because it has developed that way for most of us. That's a common thread that we can find.
Well, and what I mean by
quickly.
that is that we're having conversations that we wouldn't have had
2
years ago.
Yeah, absolutely. So how the question often comes up, or kind of, I think is just out there for many who haven't joined the conversation at all until now, or wonder what all the fuss is about. And the big question is how are we already? The hard part is if you join the conversation right now, it's into doctrine. How did it get there? And that's the backtrack that I would like to try to articulate for my own experience. And it has been that these horrifying cover-ups and crimes came spilling out that started to give us a reason to have a conversation around particularly child abuse and CSA. And so at that point, we started finding these turns in the conversation of you have to have people who have committed these crimes in meeting with your children, otherwise you're condemning them. you're denying them salvation. And in some conversations, it even went to partaking of communion or the bread and wine, and that suddenly raises a big old. There's like the record screech sound effect in there, where we suddenly looked at each other, and it was kind of like a hold the phone moment of, why do we believe that? Because that didn't align with anything I'd ever believed. And then as the confirmation on that grew, then it kind of turned from there to, well, do you believe then that you're saving us? And this being addressed to workers. And it comes back in a more nuanced, I mean, the answer kind of comes out in more nuanced places and ways, but there's an insertion there. And it varies in levels and it varies in intensities, but there's an insertion there. And that's how this got to doctrine. Because we didn't realize they viewed it that way. At least I sure didn't. And most that I have enjoyed fellowship with also felt that way. Because they understood we were following Jesus, and the only role that anyone had who was spreading the gospel message was just spreading the gospel message, spreading the good news. That was the only job. And that would align with Scripture. So if we got back to that, then we could say we are the way. And I don't think we should. I'm not saying that. But then we could say, let me rephrase that. Then we could say we are following the way. Because then we would be following Christ. If we centered our focus there. And a lot of these old fellas that I spoke of earlier, like Ben Tuin, they went door to door talking to people we'd never have the opportunity to meet, asking if they could speak to them about the gospel message. It's a risk. It's uncomfortable. And it's what they were moved to do. And if someone told them to, start deciding who could get into heaven, I don't think they'd be very comfortable with that.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not true, but that was my impression of them.
To respond to your point, you can follow the way without meaning, right? Now,
too, yes.
Finding fellowship's important, but it's there. It's not. Yeah. You don't need a specific structure that claims to be the true way when you have Jesus.
And right now, I count myself fortunate to have enough pure fellowship to consider that, to feel that I'm able to follow the way being Jesus, in the fellowship that I choose to attend here. And I love that. And as long as those two are in alignment, then there's no problem. As soon as one doesn't align with Jesus, then I have taken an oath to follow the Lamb wherever he will lead, and that's what I intend to do.
Amen. Well, I appreciate it again. I appreciate your time, and I know a lot of people are anticipating hearing from you when they find out that I interviewed you. And so I really do appreciate it, and it's been a great afternoon.
Yeah, I've enjoyed it as well. So thank you for coming out. And I understand you have probably quite a few anticipated interviews. So
this is day 2 of a 20 day trip.
Wow.
And
many miles ahead of you.
Yeah, I have probably 6 or 7 interviews lined up so far.
Nice.
So it's going to be amazing.
Well, I hope that they all go very well, and that
All to the glory of God. It's to point those that come from our culture to Christ and share the stories of what he's done in our lives.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's one thing to that's one thing that has often troubled me about a lot of this, is that if it's true that we're giving the glory to God, then it does not matter what construct he brings growth to us through. He can reach Paul and Silas in the middle of prison, chained to the floor, and he can bring glory there to people before people who had no idea who he even was.
Mm-hmm.
Then we need to not confuse ourselves as to what he needs and wants, and just take the time to realign ourselves and be clear. Does he want this at all? You know, what I'm doing does he even want what I'm doing, or am I bringing my sacrifice like Cain and expecting that he will accept it?
Mm-hmm.
Building it and expecting him to come. That's not going to work.
Yep.
We must go to where he is.
Amen.
So